So, hello everyone, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to today's session. Please, if you're on the call, go ahead and drop a message on the Discord server so that others can know that class has started and they can join. We already have your instructor on the call. Hi, David.
Hi, Amaka.
All right, so welcome today, David.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
All right, it's good to have you. So, just a quick one. David is a cloud engineer at Skill Capacity, and he'll be taking us this class. So, be rest assured you're in safe hands. All right, so I think it's over to you, David. You can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Amaka. First off, I'm grateful for this opportunity, to try and share my knowledge based on the field I am in. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, so first off, let me share my screen and then we can dive deep into today's topic. Yep. So is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible. Can see it.
Okay. Thank you. So once again, my name is David Awanta, and I'm a cloud engineer with Skill Capacity. So today I happen to be taking you through this topic, AWS storage and database solutions. So before we go right in, just a brief, something about me already said, but still doing it. A cloud engineer, 5 times AWS certified. I'm an AWS community builder as well. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just type in David Makafui Awanta, that's name, and you'll find me. I also do have some articles or blogs on Medium with that username, Awanta David. Yep. So I think that's it about me. So for today, I think with regards to storage and database, the agenda is practically looking at Amazon Simple Storage Service, popularly known as the Amazon S3. Then we'll going to look at the Amazon Elastic Block Storage, that's EBS, and then something on a database service, which is the Amazon Relational Database Service. So yeah, we'll take the first point, which is the Amazon Simple Storage Service, Amazon S3. So with this, we'll do a brief introduction to what S3 is, like what exactly it is, what is this service, and what does it do. We look at some of its features, uh, the storage classes within the S3 storage itself, the benefits, and then the use cases. So now, you can all bear with me that we do have various means or ways by which we store our, stuffs at home. You could consider your food that you store it probably in your perishable stuffs in your fridge or refrigerator. You store your clothes in your wardrobe. So bringing this logic into the cloud, right, you can think of it as, every storage service in the cloud has its specific use and what you can store you know within that storage, right? So you definitely cannot go and put your clothes in a refrigerator or a deep freezer or whatever, right? You are keeping it in your wardrobe because that's where it's supposed to be, basically. So in the cloud, we have various storage services, and you have to know where exactly you are keeping what and storing what for, best use case and optimizing cost purposes, right? So with this diagram you see here, this is a high level overview of Amazon S3, right? So to your on my far left, you do see where or what files are coming into S3. You have the analytics data, the log files, application data, your videos and pictures, maybe your backup files and archives. So all these files could be documents, your Excel, whatever, you are trying to put that into Amazon S3. So you move that data into Amazon S3. Now when it gets into an S3, that storage now becomes called a bucket. So you see that image there looking like a bucket. So that's the Amazon S3 bucket, right? So that is where the file you have is going to be stored, right? And anything stored in that bucket is referred to as an object. So uh, when you are working in the cloud and you store something in an S3, you refer to that file or video or whatever you store in the S3 bucket as an object. Now, when you store that object or the data within the S3 bucket, there are some features or some components you could make utilize of, right? So you store your data and then you have those features right there in the middle as you see. So first off, you see the control access to data. Now, let's say you've packed your clothes in a wardrobe. You could either allow anyone that comes into your room to have access to your wardrobe and see whatever you have in there, or you could pack your clothes in there and just lock the wardrobe so that nobody have access to it. So that's practically the mindset behind having a control access to your data, right? So whatever you store in the S3 bucket, you are trying to ensure that uh, not everyone can access it, and you define or determine who can access or who or which other service can access that data that you store in the S3 bucket, right? Then we look at optimizing cost with storage classes. We'll later on discuss more about the storage classes, but what is happening here is whatever you are storing in that bucket uh, must be stored well so that you don't overpay for what is not being used frequently or something that's infrequently used, and then you are just paying for it, right? So there are different type of storage classes that we do have within Amazon S3 that makes sure that you are able to move your files or whatever or your objects to a different storage class so that you do not incur a cost for an object that you are not frequently using, right? So the third one, you see, replicate data to any region. So in this sense, let's say you create an S3 bucket in a region. With AWS, they have the global infrastructure where you can deploy services across different regions, right? So let's say you create your S3 buckets in US East 1, but then you need that same data within that bucket in another region. So what you can do is replicate whatever is in that bucket to another bucket in a different region, right? So you don't have to go about creating a new bucket and then storing the same objects you have in this region in that bucket in another region, right? So you could just replicate that, and whatever data that comes in is being replicated to that new bucket in the other region. So that's the mindset here, or that's the concept here. And you see access from on-premise or VPC. That is practically accessing the data you have in the S3 bucket, or accessing the whole S3 bucket from on-premise. On-premise is like having your own data center or your own office outside of the cloud, and you want to access an object or a file within S3. So this is where you have the options or the capabilities of being able to access the objects within the S3 bucket. Or there's the VPC, which is the virtual private cloud. So this service, I try to always use this logic behind it. So see yourself as you live in an estate. The estate is is always surrounded, or is a gated community, right? So you have walls all over, but you do have the house within the estate also having a wall around it. So the main wall having the gated, like the gated community, is like the cloud itself. Now your house that is being surrounded with a wall within the estate is now like your VPC. So that is like an extra layer of security, isolating your house in a way and securing your house, right? So that's the concept of VPC, so virtual private cloud. So within that, you are able to also securely access objects within an S3 bucket through a terminology we know as the gateway endpoint, right? So through gateway endpoint, you are able to access objects within S3. Then the last but not least, but we see protect and secure your data. Now, whatever file or data you have within the S3 bucket, it needs some form of protection, right? So this is where the concept of encryption can come in, right? Where you are able to encrypt the data or the objects that are in the S3 bucket, so that it's not easily accessible to anyone unless the person has a decryption mechanism to decrypt whatever has been encrypted, right? So you try to mask the object in a different format so that it doesn't reveal what exactly it is to outsiders, unless probably the person has the decryption key to actually decrypt that object and see what exactly it is. Then the last one, which is gaining visibility into your storage, right? So S3 has this feature called the storage lens. So it's more or less like an S3 monitoring tool that monitors the usage of your files, or the access patterns of your files, how the S3 bucket is being utilized, the size of the objects within the files within the S3 buckets, and how the objects are being accessed often or infrequently. So with this, you are able to determine which objects are mostly used within your S3 buckets, or which objects are taking up more space within the S3 bucket. So that's like gaining visibility with the use of storage lens. So now, after having all these capabilities, you have your file stored within S3. You would like to make use of those objects within the S3 bucket, right? So you could make advanced analytics works. So, for instance, you have a feature to integrate another service called the Amazon Quick Sites, which basically gives you analytical feature to create dashboards. Then you can also make you know AI use cases out of the objects you store in the S3 buckets. So this practically is like a high level overview of what S3 within the AWS cloud is like. Now I would you know go on to talk a bit more about what the S3 is. So the first point, Amazon Simple Storage Service. That's how the name was coined, S3. So simple storage service. It's a very simple service, but as a strong service, as I think nobody would doubt the fact that they don't like S3. S3 is a very useful service within the AWS ecospace, right? So this is an object storage service. So as I said earlier, anything that you store within the S3 bucket is referred to as an object. It could be your documents, it could be your videos, it could be your text file, it could be your CSV files. Anything that you store within the S3 bucket is known as an object. Now, an object uh, could be of maximum size of 5 terabytes within the S3 bucket. So there's no S3 has unlimited storage capacity, right? But when you are uploading a file to the S3, the maximum size of one object it can take is 5 terabytes. Now, you see the very last sentence which says object uploaded can be in a single put of 5 gigabytes. So even though the size of one object can be 5 terabytes, if you are putting that object in an S3 bucket, it has to be of the size 5 gig. So there's this terminology or this technology that happens if the file is more than 5 gig. So that's called a multi-part upload, right? So what happens is when the file is larger than 5 gig, you sort of use the AWS CLI, that's the command line interface, right, to sort of upload this file. And what happens in the background is going to divide this object into smaller chunks. And then when it finally gets into S3, it combines again to for you to get the actual size, which is more than 5 gig. So let's say yourself and your colleagues, probably about 10 of you, are going on an excursion, and you only have, let's say, a Mini Cooper, not a big van or anything, like a small saloon car, right? All of you cannot go into that saloon car. So you sort of, get an extra car or two extra cars where all of you can, jump into different cars so that one car is not congested. Now, if all of you are divided up into these 2 or 3 cars, you are all going to the same destination. And when you get to the same destination, you have achieved your purpose of getting to the point of the excursion, right? So before getting to the place, because you are more than the capacity of the car, you divide yourselves. But when you get to the point of destination, you come together again, forming your 10 friends that you were before you set off, right? So this is the concept behind this. More than 5 gig, you cannot upload it. So what it does is it divides the actual size, let's say 10 gig, into different chunks, either into 5 gig or 2 gig of 5, right? Then when it gets to S3, it now combines again to give the 10 gig. So that's how the multi-part upload works for objects that are more than 5 gig. Yeah. On the third point, customers of all sizes and industries can use Amazon S3. Amazon S3 has unlimited storage size, so definitely it can store anything and any amount of data based on any use case. Now, some of the core concepts you have to know with regards to S3 is the bucket. The bucket is like the container which stores the objects. The object is the content you store in a bucket. So the content being the videos, the images, the documents, your files. Then the keys. The keys is like the unique identifier for an object. So that's like the specific name. So when you're storing a file or you have your files on your personal computer, you always name them, right? So let's say you have a Word document, you could name it my resume, then docs. That's like the name of the file. So that's referred to as the key within S3. Like that's the unique identifier or the unique name. Then we have the bucket policy. So in order to control access to the object or the data you have within your S3, this is where you sort of define the permission levels. So as a resource-based policy used to grant access to your objects your bucket and then the objects in it. So when you define the bucket policy, you can give access to whoever you want and what exact actions they can perform in that bucket or to the objects within that bucket, right? So that's what the bucket policy is. So moving on, we'll look at some of the features of S3 and explain it a little more. So you see features of Amazon S3. The first one on the list is object lifecycle management. So when you remember, I talked about, I just give a brief intro about storage classes, where you are able to move your objects between storage classes in order to optimize cost. So that's like you are, managing the life cycle of the object. So there are some objects that you do not often use. So let's say with your personal computer, right? Every day you wake up, if you are a student, there are some files you mostly open, maybe your PDF files that you learn every day or take a look at every day. Those ones are frequently accessed and you know where exactly they are. So you just open your laptop, your PC, you go to them. Those are frequently accessed files. And in S3, you know where exactly to store that file because you're always accessing them. And there are other files that may be from your previous semesters or, you know, levels behind that are still there that you may need, but you are not actually using. They may also be there, but in S3, there's a storage class. You could keep those files or objects in so that you do not incur an extra cost on something you are not using very often, right? So with object lifecycle management, you transition your objects to other storage classes or expire the objects. So you can define a lifetime for your objects. So let's say after 90 days, delete this file or remove it from my S3 bucket. After 90 days, make sure you move this file or this object to another storage class for me. So that's the whole idea of object lifecycle management. Then we do have the cross-region replication. I spoke about that earlier, where you're able to replicate your objects into other buckets in different regions, right? You have your bucket in US East 1 and another bucket in US East 2. You can replicate the objects in the bucket in US East 1 to the bucket in US West 1 or East 2. Then data encryption. You protect the data while in transit. So there's this aspect where you are able to protect the data that is being sent to S3. And even when the data is stored within S3, you are able to protect it. I think now AWS has made it an option by default at rest. Your object is protected. So by default, there's an encryption mechanism that's being enabled on the objects that you stored within an S3 bucket. Then there's versioning, right? So the concept of versioning is to keep multiple variants of an object in the same bucket. So let's say you are working on your final project. So you have this documentation and all. You sort of do a chapter 1, chapter 2. Now you save this file, let's say my final year project. You store this within S3. Then you come back another time, you sort of do chapter 3, chapter 4, which is also stored in the name my final year project. So now when the first one, which is chapter 1, chapter 2, is being stored in the S3 bucket, having the name my final year project, then you later on add chapter 3, chapter 4 in a different file with the same name, what is going to happen is there are two different versions going to be created because they are in the same file name, right? If you don't enable versioning, what is going to happen is chapter 3, chapter 4 is going to override chapter 1, chapter 2 because they are in the same file name, right? So even on your normal PC, when you create a file, when you create two different files with the same name, it will ask you to replace existing, right? So that is how it works. When you have there's two objects having the same name, the latest one is going to replace the old one. But when you have versioning enabled, then you are going to keep the two and it's going to be versioned with IDs. So you can still have both objects or files. Then there's the aspect of event notifications. So this is with regards to anything that happens within the S3 bucket, you receive a notification or you can receive an alert, right? You can do this by connecting to another service known as the SNS. So you receive an alert either to your mobile phone or to your email or either through SMS or emails, right? So there could be actions or events that occur or happen to the S3 bucket or to the objects within the S3 bucket, right? So, for instance, if someone uploads a new file into the S3 bucket, you can create an event notification that will alert you that someone has uploaded a new file. Or if someone deletes a file from the S3 bucket, you can also get a notification based on that, right? So, let's look at the major one I've been talking about a lot. That's the storage classes. Let's dive deep. So you see this various types or various forms of storage classes. There are a lot. All because AWS cares about you and wants you to optimize your cost a lot. So they have all these storage classes to benefit you with whichever state you are. So the standard is what is mostly used. So when you create your S3 buckets, that is what you are getting. You are getting the standard, which is sort of a general purpose storage for active and frequently accessed data. So data that you access frequently or use every day, you sort of use the S3 standard, and it has its own pricing. Then we have the S3 intelligent tiering. So this storage class helps you to optimize your cost by automatically moving the data to the most cost-effective access tier based on the access patterns. So how this happens is when you move your objects to this storage class, or try to configure the intelligent tiering on an S3 bucket, what happens is there's this machine learning feature behind it that is able to determine the access patterns, or how it determines or monitors how you access the files or the objects within the S3 buckets, and is able to automatically move it to uh, another storage class based on how you access it. So if, for instance, you have file A and file B, and every day you are accessing file A, for some time, it's able to determine that file B is not frequently accessed. So it's going to move it to another storage class for you so that you don't incur cost on that file B file that is there that is not being frequently accessed. So that's what the intelligent tiering storage class does. Then we have the standard infrequent access. So this is where, so one thing about the intelligent tiering is you mostly configure this when you don't know like the access patterns of your files. You don't know how often or your how often or the file or the object you have, you don't know how is very unpredictable. how you access it. So you can configure this and it's able to automatically move the objects around the other storage classes for you, right? Then we have the infrequent access. So from the name, the object is infrequently accessed, but whenever you need it, probably you need it very fast and some millisecond retrieval, you need that object. You can store your object within this storage class. The cost is less, but you retrieve your files very quickly or very fast. Then there is the one zone infrequent access. Now, going back to the concept of global infrastructure, right? When you have your regions, within your regions, you have availability zones, right? So a region can have about two, three availability zones, right? Now, with one zone infrequent access, that means you are storing the objects uh, in an S3 bucket in one zone. So when you create an S3 bucket, what happens behind the scenes is the S3 bucket is created across three availability zones. So now when you go to this option, which is the one zone infrequent access, it means the object is being stored in just one availability zone within the S3 bucket. So now the disadvantage here is if that availability zone is to go down, then whatever data you have in that bucket is gone. So now if you want to do this, then it means the data or the objects you have within that storage class, it's not something it's not critical to you, and it's something you can easily get back, right, from somewhere else. So you don't care about it. You just want to, lower your cost very much. So you just put it in there. Whatever happens and it gets lost, uh, you don't really care because you can still get another version or another form of that object, right? So that's the one zone infrequent access. Then we have the glacier. Glacier, it used to just be S3 glacier, but now it's been divided into two, which is the glacier instant retrieval and glacier flexible retrieval. So now the glacier is mostly for storing your objects for long term, something that you hardly access. Let's say like something you access in a year, right, or annually. Like, you store your objects there, you store your files there. Maybe at the end of the year, you go back to that file just to work on something, right? So this is where you use the storage. So in using the instant retrieval, there's low cost as well, but you are able to retrieve the file in milliseconds, right? Now, the difference between the instant retrieval and the flexible retrieval is that with instant retrieval, you can retrieve the object or the file in milliseconds, but in flexible retrieval, you get to retrieve the objects within a space of some minutes to some hours, right? So you don't get it instantly as compared to the instant retrieval, as you can hear from the names, instant retrieval. Yep. So flexible retrieval, you get it, some minutes later, some minutes to some hours later, as compared to instant retrieval that you can get in milliseconds. Now there's the Glacier Deep Archive. This is mostly for archiving. So let's say your company has some licensed documents that they want to keep. It's not very often that they use those until probably there are critical moments they have to look at those. So this storage class is like the lowest cost storage for something, for objects that you want to store for long term that are rarely accessed. So with this, you sort of have a retrieval time of it being in hours, probably 24 hours or 48 hours later before you get that file, right? So that's with the Glacier Deep Archive. That's the lowest cost you get, but in getting back your objects, it will take you, 24 to 48 hours before you get that object. Now there's S3 on Outpost. Outpost in itself is like a hardware device that you sort of purchase from AWS and place it within your office space or your data center or whatever. So the Outpost is like a hardware device. It's a hardware on its own. So more like having servers within your data center, right? So when you have this hardware device on your local facility, right? You can, with this storage, is able to deliver the object from whichever S3 storage or within the cloud to that local facility within that hardware device within the local facility, right? So more like having S3 itself on your local on your hardware device in the local facility. That is with the S3 on Outpost. So yeah, so these are the very storage classes that we have. So if you want to optimize your cost within S3, you look at these options and try to transition your objects or your files or documents, videos, whatever, all referred to as objects from one storage class to another. Now we look at some of the benefits of S3. What S3 offers. So one is scalability. So AWS having the Amazon S3 having the feature of you know unlimited storage size means it could store any amount of data to scale very well depending on whatever range of data you have. Is there to serve you, is there to hold your data. Then durability. AWS S3, Amazon S3 is very durable. They try to use this term where it's 11 nines of durability, right? So you can imagine they don't want to, go ahead and say it's 100% durable because anything can happen. So they try to keep it safe by saying 99.999. So 11 nines of durability. So you can see the bucket is very durable. So you hardly lose. Well, since I started using this service, I've never lost any data within an S3 bucket. So you can see it's very durable. 99.999 continuous, 11 nines. Then it's very cost effective. Having the option of transitioning your objects between storage classes can help you, optimize cost, and this makes this service very cost effective. Then it's highly available. I told you in the back end, when you create an S3 bucket, it's more or less like you've created the bucket within 3 availability zones, right? So when one availability zone is down, you still have 2 other availability zones where your bucket is. So the data is still safe. So with this one, they say four nines of availability. Yep. Except one zone which is a bit less, like 3 nines. Yeah, 3 nines of availability. Yep. Then versioning. This is a benefit because you don't easily lose your data or your objects, right? So when you enable versioning, you are sort of making sure you still have some aspects of your file. Wow. Seems I've spent a lot of time on this service. But let's move on quickly to the use cases. So you can use it for backup and storage. You can use it to host static contents. So something that's not, you just want to display something on a website, like that's not an interactive website. You can use the S3 to host it. Then you have the data lake. So the data lake itself is a different concept, but S3 is more or less like the primary storage for data lakes. When you are working in analytics, sort of use this form of conceptualization. So S3 helps in making data lake perform. Then we have content delivery. So probably you store your files, your videos, whatever, and you can share them. So definitely it's holding your contents and is delivering them based on your use case. Then we have data archiving. So you can store your data in some storage classes as we saw for a very long time. Yep. So practically this is it for S3. Now let's look at EBS, Amazon Elastic Block Storage. So yep, okay. Now this block storage is practically designed or is purposely designed for Amazon EC2 instance, right? So EC2 instance is like a server, a virtual server designed by AWS, where you could create a server on the cloud, right? So with EBS, you sort of have these volume types. It could be SSD or HDD. SSD, which is solid state drive, and HDD, hard disk drive. So solid state drives have high performance than hard disk drives, and then you could attach this to the EC2 instance and then run your application. So, in simple terms, EBS is an easy to use, scalable, high performance block storage service designed for EC2. So, when you have your instance or your EC2 instance, it needs the EBS volume in order serving as a storage, right? So that's like your hard disk drive or your SSD for your laptops or and your machines and all that. So this storage persists even after you terminate your EC2 instance. So when you have data on the EBS volume, it's still there even after you remove the EC2 instance or delete the EC2 instance, right? So EC2 instance has this other storage, which is the instant store. So with that, the moment you terminate the EC2 instance, the data is lost. So sort of like the ROM kind of concept, right? So with EBS volume, your data persists even after you terminate the instance. Then you attach an EBS volume to just one instance, right? But there are types of volumes that you could actually attach to multiple EC2 instances, and all those EC2 instances will use that one EBS volume, right? Then they are AZ locked. The AZ locked here is availability zone. So when you create an EBS volume, you create it based on a specific availability zone, right? So you cannot move the EBS volume out of that availability zone. If you want to do this, want to move that EBS volume to a different availability zone, there is the concept of creating snapshots. So you create a snapshot of that EBS volume, and then you can create another EBS volume out of that snapshot in a different availability zone. So practically this the concept and introduction to what EBS volume is. Now we look at the types of EBS volume. So we have the general purpose SSD. As you remember, we have SSD types and the HDD types. So the general purpose SSD and the provisioned IOPS. IOPS is input output operation per second. That's like a unit measurement for the maximum read and write to a storage, right? So sort of the measuring the maximum number of reads and writes you can make to a storage. That's what the IOPS stands for. Then with general purpose, we have different or sub sections under general purpose. So when you choose a general purpose type of volume, you either go with the GP2 or the GP3. The difference here is in terms of performance, right? GP3 has higher performance than the GP2. but they practically do the same thing. Then the SSD, you have the IO1, IO2, and then the IO2 block express. So IO1, IO2 sort of do similar, have similar performance capabilities. I think you can have an IOPS of 64,000, a maximum IOPS of 64,000 for IO1 and IO2. But with IO2 Block Express, it can go up to 256,000. Yep. So that's with the provisioned IOPS SSD. Then we have the throughput optimized HDD. So this is mainly for storage is a form of EBS storage where you actually want to consider cost, but then again, you want to access whichever data you have very quickly, or so maybe you want to make use of some form of database or anything, but you are considering cost. You could make use of the throughput optimized, and it could work but not as efficiently as provisioned IOPS. Provisioned IOPS is very expensive. Yep. So it depends on the workload, but you could make use of the throughput optimized. Now the code HDD is the lowest of them all. Is the lowest cost. Doesn't cost, and is designed for something that you will not access very frequently, right? And throughput optimized has higher performance than the code HDD. So there's also something that the general purpose SSD and provision SSD can do that the throughput optimized and code cannot do. So with general purpose and provision IOPS, they can be used as boot volumes, right? So boot volumes in the sense that let's take your normal laptop or your normal PCs. When you need to set up your Windows and all, you need that boot volume within your hard drive, right? For it to set up. Now, the EC2 instance needs some form of that to make use of whichever form of OS you want to use on the EC2 instance, right? Now, you can use this general purpose or the provision IOPS to serve as a boot volume for that EC2 instance. That is something throughput and code HDD cannot do. Now, with provisioned IOPS, that is where you can actually make use of the multi-attach, where you attach one EBS volume to multiple EC2 instances. But with the other types of volumes, 1:1 sort of. But with provision IOPS, 1:many. So this has to do with the types of EBS volumes, and we look at the features and benefits. So snapshots and backups. So when you take a snapshot of something, it's like you make a screenshot, you are keeping a record of something, right? So you sort of do this to keep track of the volume at certain points, or you want to make use of the volume somewhere else, or moving the volume to another AZ, you can make use of snapshots, and this can also serve as a backup. Then there's data lifecycle manager. This is where you actually automate the process of snapshots, making snapshots of EBS volumes. And then when you make the snapshots, you can define the retention times, how long that snapshot should live. And yeah, so that has to do with the data lifecycle manager. Then there's data encryption. With EBS volume as well, you can encrypt your data using something called the KMS, which is the key management service. So you can create your own keys and then encrypt the EBS volume with that. You can resize the volume. So when you select a volume, either you select 8 gig, but you see your workload is going way more than that, you can resize the volume to a higher sizes, right? Then EBS multi-attached, I think I spoke about that. You can attach one EBS volume to multiple EC2 instances, specifically the provision IOP type of EBS volumes. Then EBS migration, that's like moving the EBS volume from one AZ to another AZ, even though it's locked. So you just create a snapshot of that EBS volume and then create a volume out of it in another availability zone. And look at some of the use cases can be used as boot volumes. You can use the EBS volumes for your development and test environments. You can attach it to EC2 instances for business application, database workloads, data warehouses, and log processing. Yep. So I think I have about 8 minutes to finish up on RDS. So Amazon Relational Database Service, called the RDS. So we all know what a database is. Basically, database is an organized collection of data, right? So where you have data of different entities in an organized manner, right? Now, when we look at relational, we are referring to the term where the database that stores and provide access to data points are related to each other, right? So it sort of follows a specific structure, or the structure or schema is fixed. So for instance, if you have a database of, let's say, students, right? So you have the first name, last name, age, year of entry, blah blah blah. So with those, you see that when you start filling up the columns and the rows, they have to follow that format. So the structure is sort of fixed. You can't put the age and probably first name. So that distorts the whole process. So there's some sort of relation, right, between the number of students you put across the whole database. So this is in AWS. They have RDS that supports other structured query language database servers. So let's look at introduction. So Amazon Relational Database Service is a web service that makes it easier to set up, operate, and scale a relational database in the cloud. So it provides cost-efficient, resizable capacity for an industry standard relational database and manages common database administration tasks. So simply, this service is managed by AWS in the backend, right? So you don't have to worry about managing the server or the back end of this service, or trying to make patch management, or trying to patch or automate patching and all that. It's a managed service. So AWS handles all that. All you have to worry about is, deploying this service based on which database engine it supports for your use case, right? So you can connect your application to this database service, and it's going to offer you security and compliance, performance, and scalability. So with security and compliance, we also have encryption here, where you could encrypt your database. Performance and scalability, you are able to create a read replica. So what happens is, with a single database, you can create read replicas, where if an application is wants to read something from the database, they focus on that read replica, whilst if you want to write to the database, the write actions to using different path, right? So there's no congestion on the database as to its action of probably writing and reading, right? There's a read replica that the application can read from, and when it's writing to the database, there's a different part it used to write to the database. Then it's a managed service, so there's automated patching and upgrades made to it by AWS themselves, so you don't have to worry about it. Monitoring and alerting. So you have this service, CloudWatch, so you can integrate. RDS is easily integrated with CloudWatch, where you can monitor what's going on within your database, and when there's maybe a breach or uh, something that's making the database not run, you can get an alert. You can also create snapshots of the database for easy backup and recovery, right? So all this being done by AWS. So all you focus on is the actual work you want to be done. Focus on innovation. You can migrate your SQL server from on-premise to the cloud easily, and then you don't spend time on managing the database. Yep. And you decrease capital and operational expenses. So with what you would have to set up within your local data center and all, when you use the RDS, I think there's less cost because you pay for what you are using. You don't make future expenses for what you may or may not use, right? So supported database engines for RDS is the MySQL. You have the Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQL, Oracle, MariaDB. All these databases have their specific, uses. So depending on your use case and whichever database engine you would like to use, you can go into RDS, set it up, and select the database engine type that you want. Now, the Amazon Aurora, which is the last one, is something that AWS created and is compatible with MySQL and PostgreSQL. But what happens here is with Aurora MySQL, it's like five times, in terms of performance, is five times way better than the normal MySQL you use in RDS, right? And for Postgres, it's like three times better than what you use within the RDS, right? And yeah, so in terms of having replicas of that database engine, you can, with Aurora, you can have about 15 read replicas. So AWS is trying to sell their product, right? Even though they have RDS that supports MySQL, which is like an open source server for databases, when you go with Aurora, you sort of get higher performance use for MySQL, right? So that is what they are trying to sell out. Even though Aurora is very, the price is more than compared to the use of MySQL within RDS. In terms of efficiency, Aurora gives you that. So you could assess your options. If you want efficiency to cost, you could go with Aurora. If your priority is cost, then you could go with the MySQL on RDS. Then we look at the features and benefits. We have automated backups. So you can enable automated backups on your RDS instance. So automatically backups are being created. So scalability, database is able to adjust based on the demand, or yeah, based on the demand on the database is able to scale to accommodate whatever is coming in. Then in terms of performance, right, when you create read replicas, there's not so much load on the database because whatever is reading from the database is reading from a replica, right? And when you are making a write or modifying something within a database, there's also a different part to it. And we can think of disaster recovery. Can enable multi-AZ for the RDS that you set up. So this gives it the feature of being highly available. So when one availability zone goes down, another one is there for you to pick up from that, so that you don't lose the data that you have on the database, right? So multi-AZ. Then security, you still have the option of encryption, and then you control access to the database that you have. Patch management, this is being handled by AWS themselves, since this is a managed service, so you don't have to worry about the patching and upgrading of your database service. Now, let's look at the use cases. So, yeah, as usual, database hosting can web applications. So if you sort of make use of three-tier web architecture, you can look at this database in the back end where the application can access whatever is being stored. Can think of e-commerce where you make transactions a lot. You can have this database in the back end for transactions. Then this can serve as also a backup. So probably have your database on-prem, but you want to have a backup in the cloud, you can look at Amazon RDS. Yep. I'm sorry for rushing through because these topics are a lot and it needs more than 1 hour to actually go deep into these services one by one. But I hope what I've shared across so far has given you, some insights as to what these three services are: S3, EBS, and RDS. So I think that is all I have to offer today. And sorry for the 2 or 3 extra minutes I spent on my assigned time. So thank you all. Uh,
Thank you, David. No problem about the 2 to 3 minutes. You have some questions though. Can you hear me?
okay, yeah, yeah,
Okay, so I'll have them displayed on the screen. So can you see it?
yeah. Come in. Is there any consequences if you use Blazor instant retrieval storage class for objects you access often? Ah, so I think that's I cannot say because I've not really made use of that. I've not tried that because we all feel like if something we are going to access has to be in the standard, but if you want to pass, you know, shortcuts and try to cut costs and make use of, accessing your data or objects very quickly. hmm, this is something I have to try out and see what the result will be because I really don't know what the consequences. I just follow best practice.
All
Yeah.
right.
And EBS persists data even after deleting an instance. Does that means you'll be charged for the persistent? Yes. So when you detach an EBS volume from an EC2 instance, yeah, you'll be charged for that EBS volume, as that the EBS volume is without EC2 instance. But when it's attached to an EC2 instance, you are not charged for that.
Okay.
Will I be charged for creating a snapshot of a database instance or service apart from the main DB instance or service I'm using? Yeah. So when you create a snapshot and it's there, you are being charged a little, like in cents.
All right. So I think those are all the questions we have. Thank you so much, David, for coming on this class and sharing your knowledge with us. Really do appreciate.
Okay. Thank you too. And I hope I've shared enough knowledge.
Yeah, you have. So, guys, you can go ahead and follow David on LinkedIn. His handle will be dropped on the group chat, and then you can just find him as well from the Top Universe page on LinkedIn. So, thank you so much, David. Have a lovely night ahead.
Thank you too, Amaka.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
All right. Bye.